Tales of Stattendor, The Unlikely Company. Chapter 1. The Sword of Axanar, Part 6. After walking for some time, Tilman stopped, as did the rest of the company. Zander mustered the courage to peer beyond his leader and look to see what lay ahead. Just there, standing among the tree line on the roadside, a weathered statue held out its outstretched arm. Time, rain, and wind had eroded any features the stone figure might have had. Ecstatic, Tilman once again unravelled the scroll and looked over everything written within. Cautiously looking over his leader's shoulder as best he could, Zander noticed everything written upon the parchment. Within the scroll were numerous lines of text tightly clinging to each other like vines on a wall. Zander couldn't read anything, but he realized from Tilman's interest that they were of great importance. Pablar stepped away from the group while keeping his eyes fixed on the statue. There seemed to be an allure about the stone figure, which drew the elf closer to it. As he struggled to find any sort of detail to discern who or what the statue was, Pablar wondered. He wondered if the statue were of a man or a woman. Was it a mighty king or a benevolent queen? Was this a hero of great renown of some age long past? Or was it simply a monument of some kind? Whoever this person might have been, their features had been so worn down that their identity had been lost to time. What purpose would this statue have served? The elf inquired with interest. Tilman simply lowered his scroll while looking over to Pablar with disinterest. It matters not, he responded. Rolling up the scroll once again, Tilman walked towards the statue while passing the elf as he did. Zander watched as his leader trotted through the tall grass and stepped before the statue. He casually inspected the stone figure with little to no interest. He then looked past it and noticed the tree line just a few feet away. Among the trees were a collection of large stones leading into the forest away from the official road. These stones were large, but had been smoothed rigorously and left within a singular line heading deeper into the forest. These stepping stones were the size of shields, and they brought a gleeful smile to Tilman's face. "Follow the stones," Tilman suggested. Without any sort of hesitation, the leader of the company began to walk alongside the stepping stones. Pablar looked back to Volgar and Zander before shrugging with uncertainty. The stoic dwarf said nothing. He simply went on his way without even as much discussing it with the others. As Pablar was soon to join him, Zander stood alone on the road, plagued by doubt. His breathing increased with every worry and reservation on his mind. Looking back to the road he had only just taken, he thought of Rycroft and those he knew. Glancing back to the company, he noticed they were getting further and further away. He realized he could no longer wait. He had to make a choice. Swallowing his fears, Zander rushed to join the others. Running along the stepping stones, he soon rejoined the trio. Zander soon trailed behind the company and took up the rear. He didn't look back. Instead, he kept looking forwards. He fixed his eyes upon Tilman and continued to follow him. He seemed content and dispelled his concerns as he pressed on. All four members of the company ventured deeper into the forest while keeping their eyes wide open. Zander looked up towards the sky. The sun was continuing to fade. Night was slowly approaching. None of the others showed any concern and followed the path through the forest. As they walked, the grass started to appear shorter than the rest they had encountered. Here, it seemed the grass was a shade lighter and even finer. Zander continued to follow the others. He noticed Tilman striding ahead. The dwarf looked back to the young man. "Tell me, lad," Volgar addressed Zander, "have you ever explored these forests before?" Volgar slowed his walking and allowed the young man to catch up with him. Zander and Volgar now walked beside each other through the forest. "Well," Zander replied, "I'm from Rycroft. Since I was a small child, I've heard all the stories of Arthur's Pencavern, the legendary hero who founded the kingdom of Pencavern. When he died in battle, They built a tomb on the site of the battle, and they buried him there. They planted a few trees in the surrounding area, and over the many, many years, it grew and became a forest, and expanded out. The Saltwood has always been here in Bonwendel. Volgar stopped in his tracks. Was this king of yours buried with gold? Upon hearing this question from Volgar, even Pablar stopped and looked back as he waited for the response from the human. Zander felt their eyes fixed upon him, waiting for a response. He cleared his throat before responding. Not that I know of, Zander awkwardly stated. Legends claim he was buried with a handful of his belongings. But, before he could even finish, the scowling dwarf, upon hearing the young man's words, made little effort to hide his displeasure. Tilman hadn't noticed, as he had continued to walk deep into the forest, that his company had stopped. Volgar pressed his lips together before taking a deep breath through his nose. Pressing his lips together, the dwarf let out a sudden, high-pitched whistle. This sudden hiss sent a sharp pain to Tilman's ears, so much so he stopped and looked back. He noticed with confusion that his companions standing not so far away had stopped. One appeared confused, one seemed disappointed, and the other seemed greatly frustrated and annoyed. Volgar gestured with a simple flick of his wrist and a glare that could melt ice. Cautiously approaching with a reserved pace, the leader of the company soon joined the rest in a conveniently formed circle. You told us there would be gold and a fortune to claim, Volgar addressed Tilman with great disdain. The dwarf and the elf both stood silently while they waited for an explanation. Tilman tried his best to preserve his calm persona, even trying to appear unfazed by the rising tensions. Zander remained silent, but did not attempt to intervene. He instead remained where he was and watched. Volgar, with a despondent frown and a heavy walk, drew closer to Tilman with his crossbow lowered. The leader of the company jovially tried to relieve the pressure with a humorous smile and explained the situation. There is a great deal of treasure, my friend, the merchant answered. We have travelled to the Saltwood seeking the sword of Axanar. This is a weapon of great importance, and once we are able to... Before Tilman could even finish his sentence, Pablar stepped towards him. The elf rested his hand upon his short sword, yet did not unsheath the weapon. Unless this treasure can earn us a fortune, Pablar intruded, I see no reason to go any further. Zander could feel the tension rising, and it left a terrible taste on his tongue. Even his stomach would turn and swell as he worried about what would happen. Volgar simply looked towards the young boy, and looked him up and down with his stoic eyes. Keep your distance, lad, the dwarf advised. This could turn rather unpleasant, and you need not be hurt. Volgar then returned his attention back to Tilman, and glared at him with frustration as he didn't bother to hide it. Now, Mr. Peister, Pablar and I were told by you that joining your expedition would lead us to a windfall. Is this not true? I ask because I am struggling to see how a rusty relic could be worth such a vast venture. Tilman glanced to Pablar. The elf said nothing, and only continued his relentless stare. Zander felt his hands and fingers twitch and shake, while his chest began to tighten. Each breath became harder, and the struggle to be a simple witness proved to be more than anything he expected. The sword is enchanted, Zander divulged urgently. The sudden announcement drew the attention of all three men, but only two of them were confused. This admission from the young man brought a wave of intrigue to dispel the rising tensions. Pablar released Tilman from his grasp and stepped towards the timid young man, but removed his hand from around his sword. Explain yourself, boy, instructed the elf with an eagerness. Zander noticed Volgar now focused his whole attention on him, and even Tilman sought to hear the young man's words. With the eyes of all three men focused on him, Zander thought it best to explain himself. If you've enjoyed our work, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Every subscriber will gain early access to upcoming episodes, early access to upcoming comic books, and additional content such as short stories and novels and novellas. So subscribe and stay tuned for more episodes of Tales of Stattendor, the Unlikely Company.